Hi, my name is Charmy. At my mother's funeral, my sister gave a beautiful speech about legacy and family, while she'd already changed the locks on the condo my mom left behind. Not just any condo, a $450 million estate filled with decades of art, memory, and history. And she told the doorman, I was no longer family. But here's what she didn't know. My mother had already made her decision, and it wasn't the one Selena expected. How did I go from erased to entrusted? Why did my mother choose the daughter she barely mentioned in public over the one who built her brand off our last name? And what exactly was locked behind that sealed door for so long? You might think this story ends in court. It doesn't. It ends with a painting that was never finished. But maybe that was the point. I thought I was prepared. I'd gone over it 100 times in my head. What I'd wear, how I'd carry myself, how I'd stay silent. Not invisible, just silent. But when I stepped into the main chapel at St. Jude's that morning, I knew within seconds that my preparation was no match for the reality I was about to face. The first thing I saw was the program. Stacked neatly in gold-embossed holders by the entrance, they were designed like a museum pamphlet, polished, curated, soulless. I picked one up, fingers trembling not from grief, but from something colder. On the back page, beneath the words "In loving memory of Odessa Durant," there were 3 names listed under immediate family: Selena Harlow, Paul Harlow, Cassandra Harlow. My name wasn't there. I stared at it for a moment too long. A woman behind me, someone I didn't recognize, tapped my shoulder and whispered, "Are you family or press?" I didn't answer. I just smiled and stepped aside. Inside, the chapel looked like a set piece. White roses everywhere. A giant photo of Mom, the one from her Architectural Digest cover, where she looked like she was posing to impress an investor, not building a home. Selena stood near the altar, shaking hands, smiling through tears. She always had a gift for the camera. Even without one around, she performed. I found a seat near the side aisle. Not with the family. Apparently, I wasn't part of that anymore. People filed in. The pianist played something somber and expensive-sounding. When the service began, Selena stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and delivered a speech so polished it might have been rehearsed with a teleprompter. She was a mother, a visionary, and the reason I became the woman I am today, Selena said, pausing just enough for effect. Everything I am, I owe to her, and I will carry on her work, her home, and her values. There it was again. Her home. I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I didn't even shift in my seat. But I felt every word like it had been thrown at me on purpose. After the service, guests flowed into the reception hall like water seeking lower ground. Selena greeted each of them as if she were the widow, not the daughter. I waited by the far table, close to the servers. Most of them didn't know me. A few gave me polite nods, the kind you give a woman who looks like she doesn't quite belong. "Is that Charmy?" someone whispered, not low enough. "I thought she lived out west now. Isn't she the artist?" I didn't bother correcting them. There was no point. When people erase you from the story, they don't want the truth. They want silence. After an hour of polite stares, and even politer avoidance, I slipped out. I told myself I needed air. What I needed was to remember I wasn't crazy. So I went to the only place that still felt like my mother, her condo. The drive uptown was short but heavy. Every block pulled me deeper into something I couldn't quite name. I wasn't going to make a scene. I just wanted to see her piano, the sketches she used to leave on the side table, maybe even the shawl she wore when she had her tea by the window. When I pulled up to the building, the doorman was new. Young, clean-shaven, trying too hard to look serious. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "Are you here to see someone?" I paused, swallowing the awkwardness. "I'm here for 31A, Odessa Durant's residence." He typed something into the screen, blinked, then looked up. "I'm sorry, I can't let you through. The access authorization was changed this morning." I pulled out my keycard, swiped it. Read, again, read. There must be a mistake. He glanced back at the monitor. It says the unit is under restricted access. I was told not to permit anyone not pre-cleared. Ms. Harlow was very specific. Ms. Harlow, not Ms. Durant, not even your sister. I stood there for a second, trying to decide if I should argue, explain, plead. But something inside me froze. Not from fear, from clarity. She said you'd try to come back, the doorman added, softer now. And that you were no longer family. I stepped back, nodding slowly. My mother's name was on that building's deed, not Selena's, but I wasn't going to fight that battle in a lobby. I turned without a word, walked back to my car. The sky had gone heavy, draped in early dusk. As I opened the door, a single raindrop hit the windshield. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic. It was just quiet. And I knew, in that moment, I was no longer grieving my mother. I was grieving something else, something I hadn't dared name. So I went back, not to the party, but to the only place where I could still see my mother's face the way it used to be. I drove to the edge of Central Park and parked, stayed in the car with the engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The city kept moving around me, horns, dogs, laughter from a bar 2 streets away. And yet I felt like I was sitting inside a glass case. 2 days passed. I stayed mostly silent, replying to messages with one-word texts, brushing off condolences with thank you emojis. I kept thinking maybe this would pass, that maybe Selena would call, say it had been a clerical mistake, that she had meant to add my name to the program, that the building lockout had been an admin error. But the call never came. Instead, an invite showed up, not directly to me, but through a mutual friend, Daniel Kim, who used to help Mom curate her gallery installations. "Thought you should see this," his text read. Attached was a photo of a cream and gold Evite, an intimate evening honoring the life and legacy of Odessa Durant, hosted by her daughter, Selena Harlow. Her daughter, not daughters, just her. I stared at the screen, rereading that line like I was waiting for it to change. Daniel followed up with, "I assumed you'd be there, but if you weren't told, that's really messed up." "Yeah," I texted back. "It is." I didn't plan to go, but by noon the next day, I was standing in front of Selena's condo building in Midtown, staring up at the glass facade. The entrance was flanked with candles and orchids. It looked more like a product launch than a memorial, and maybe that's exactly what it was. I walked in without hesitation. The doorman this time didn't stop me, probably assuming anyone who looked this pissed off must have been on the list. Inside, the space was glowing in soft amber light. String quartet in the corner, champagne being passed around by caterers in matching black masks. And people, lots of them, art donors, board members from the design council, Mom's old friends, many of whom hadn't seen her in years, but now clutched flutes of sparkling rosé like they were part of her final chapter. I stood by the corner of the main hall, watching. Photos were arranged on linen-draped tables, snapshots of Mom's career, her travel abroad, the opening of her 3rd gallery. In every one, Selena was there, polished and centered. I wasn't in a single frame. Not even the family Christmas photo I remembered vividly, because I took it. One curator, an older woman with a loud scarf, leaned in beside me and asked, "Oh, are you one of the staff? I adore the lighting in here." I gave her a flat smile and turned away. I wasn't going to explain myself to someone who couldn't even guess I might be family. I found a spot near the hallway exit. I didn't mingle, didn't drink, just observed. Selena walked into the center of the room, dressed in deep navy, subtle but expensive. She clinked her glass lightly with the stem of a fork, waited for the murmur to quiet, then began. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means more to me than you know. My mother wasn't just a force in architecture. She was a mentor, a friend, the one who shaped everything I am. I remember her telling me, 'Selena, legacy isn't about property, it's about purpose.' And I plan to carry her purpose forward in every corner of this city she loved." Polite applause followed. I stood still, arms crossed, jaw set. She named people to thank, cousins, old colleagues, even her ex-husband for supporting her vision. Not once did my name cross her lips. It didn't need to. I wasn't part of this script. But what burned more wasn't being left out. It was the precision of it. The way every image had been cropped, every detail smoothed out, history rewritten while the body was barely cold. As the crowd applauded again, I noticed something strange. Selena's speech notes had a timestamp, printed 3 days ago. That meant she wrote this before the funeral, before anyone else had even started grieving. While I was still trying to decide what dress to wear that wouldn't feel performative, I left before dessert, slipped past a waiter holding a tray of bite-sized cheesecakes, past 2 interns discussing how iconic the gallery wall looked, and out into the night. On my way out, I passed a framed photograph in the hallway. My mother, cutting the ribbon at her first gallery opening. Selena beside her, holding the scissors. I stopped. I remembered that day. I remembered standing on the other side of my mother, holding her left hand while she laughed. But in the photo here, that side was cropped. Deliberately. If you're not in the picture, they assume you were never there. I didn't go home after the event. I couldn't. I ended up at a diner near East 74th and just sat there, staring at a mug of untouched coffee that kept getting refilled by a waitress who clearly pitied me. She didn't ask questions, just kept pouring, like she knew I needed the silence more than the caffeine. By the time I left, the city was already wrapped in night. I walked aimlessly until I found myself back near the Durant building. I hadn't planned to come here, not again. But there I was, outside the lobby where 2 nights ago I had been denied like a stranger at someone else's doorstep. This time, I came prepared. I had called ahead under a different name and booked a visitor slot to the building, pretending to be a freelance designer reviewing the building's private art collection. It was a stretch, but money talks. And it turned out, so did my mother's last name. When it was convenient for them. The lobby was quiet. The new doorman looked up from his tablet but didn't say much. I nodded politely, signed in as C. Moore, and headed toward the elevator like I belonged. When the doors opened on the 31st floor, I stepped into a hallway that had once been filled with scent. Lavender, faint wood polish, the warmth of tea steeped too long. Now it smelled like citrus cleaner and new carpet. The walls were repainted in pale gray, the kind you find in high-end staging brochures. Gone were the textured wallpapers Mom had picked out after her trip to Florence. The art was gone too, replaced with impersonal, oversized prints of abstract shapes that said nothing and meant even less. The condo had been gutted. Not physically, perhaps, but spiritually? It was hollow. I stood in the foyer longer than I meant to. It felt wrong to walk further in shoes, but the rug she used to ask guests to step on before removing their footwear was missing too. So I stayed where I was. Behind me, a door clicked open. A man in a sport coat walked out from the kitchen with a wine glass. He glanced at me, gave a faint smile, and before I could say anything, held out his coat. "Oh, can you hang this up for me?" he asked. I blinked. "I'm not staff," I said evenly. He raised both hands. "Sorry, you look very efficient." I didn't bother responding. He disappeared before I could figure out whether that was a compliment or an insult. Walking past the living area, I noted more changes. The bookcase that once held my mother's journals now had color-coordinated spines of fake books. Her old reading chair, the one with worn-out armrests she refused to replace, had been swapped with a velvet chaise that didn't even face the window anymore. I checked the bedroom. Her quilted bedding was gone, replaced by something sleek and glossy. The room didn't smell like her. It smelled like nothing. But the real punch came when I turned the corner and saw what had once been her sketch room. It was now a wine cellar, an actual, glass-walled, temperature-controlled wine cellar. The walls where she had pinned her ideas, clippings, scribbled floor plans, and late-night thoughts, they were gone. In their place stood racks of Merlot and Syrah, lined like trophies. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, absorbing the silence. I took one breath, then another. This wasn't accidental. This was surgical. Selena hadn't just taken over. She had replaced everything, erased everything that made it feel like home, and refitted it like a showroom. Behind me, soft footsteps approached. I turned and saw someone I vaguely recognized, an assistant who used to work with Mom in her first gallery. He paused when our eyes met. "Charmy?" he said under his breath. I nodded. He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder and said quickly, "You didn't see me, okay?" Then he walked away. That told me everything I needed to know. Selena had made it clear to everyone, whatever my connection to this place was, it was to remain unsaid. But there was one more space I hadn't checked. At the far end of the hallway, past the newly framed mirror and the artificial orchid arrangement, was the old writing room. My mother's sacred space. She used to call it her quiet engine. It was where ideas lived before they became blueprints. The door was locked, not shut, locked, with a digital keypad I hadn't seen before. I was about to lean in, check the frame, when a voice from down the hall startled me. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave that room alone." It was one of the building's staff, dressed in maintenance gear. "Who authorized it to be locked?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The current occupant said it was to remain sealed." "Did they say why?" He shrugged. "Didn't ask, just followed the order." I looked back at the door, stood there for several seconds. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said quietly. "I didn't say you were, but some rooms aren't for guests." I smiled thinly. "Some rooms aren't supposed to be forgotten either." He didn't reply. As I turned to leave, something inside me shifted. I didn't press the issue. I didn't ask for a key. I didn't threaten legal action. But I made a silent note. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Because if there's a door you're not supposed to open, it's probably because someone's hiding what you're meant to find. I left the building with my heels echoing down the marble hallway, passing the front desk without making eye contact. Outside, the sidewalk was still damp from a light morning drizzle. I didn't call a cab. I needed the walk, a long one. I looped past Madison, then cut through Park, keeping my head down while the city carried on like nothing had happened. That night, I barely slept. I kept going back to the sealed room. The way the door stood untouched, guarded by a password and silence. What was she hiding? Or, what had been hidden from me? The next morning, I got a message from Rhea Mencken, an old friend of my mother's, someone she'd mentored back when she was building her first gallery. Rhea had always been quiet but observant. We hadn't spoken in years. Her message simply said, "Can we meet? There's something you need to see. Odessa asked me to hold it for you." We met at a small cafe tucked away behind a florist in Midtown. It smelled like lavender and roasted beans, and for a second, I imagined my mother sitting across from me, sketchbook open, stirring her tea with the wrong end of the spoon. Rhea arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a shawl I instantly recognized. My mother's. She didn't say anything about it, just handed me a small flash drive wrapped in tissue. "She sent this to me 2 days before she passed," Rhea said quietly. "Told me not to deliver it until you came looking. Until you were ready." I held it in my hand for a moment. "Ready for what?" Rhea sighed. "For the kind of truth you don't find in a will." Later that afternoon, I opened the file on my laptop. It was encrypted, password protected. But the answer came to me in an instant. My mother's old sketch title from her final solo show, Weightless Truths. It opened. There were no legal documents, no scans of property deeds or banking statements, just a single email, sent directly from her personal address, dated 4 days before the stroke. "Charmy, if you're reading this, it means you've been pushed out farther than I hoped you would. I've watched your sister rewrite more than just facts. She's rewriting meaning, And I'm sorry, I let it happen too long. But listen carefully. The key to all this isn't in court documents or gallery plaques. It's in values, ethics. You always understood that better than the rest of us. That's why this place was never about ownership. It was about stewardship, about trust. I read it twice. Then, once more, aloud, to the empty room. There was no vengeance in her tone, no bitterness, just clarity. And suddenly, I felt still. I stopped trying to be included. I no longer needed a chair at Selena's table. I had my own. And I had the truth. 2 days later, I received an invitation to a family gathering hosted by the Hastings cousins. I was surprised to see my name spelled correctly for once. It was labeled a tribute dinner, meant to honor Mom in a more intimate setting. I debated going, but something in me said I needed to show up. Not for them, but to observe. The gathering was held in a brownstone just off Lexington. When I arrived, Selena was already there, perfectly composed, surrounded by familiar faces. Everyone looked up when I entered. A few smiles. A few stares. One person I didn't recognize even asked if I was the one from Portland. As the dinner progressed, a slideshow of Mom's life played on the screen above the fireplace. Pictures of her early years, her gallery openings, ribbon cuttings, award nights, and of course, photo after photo of Selena by her side. None of me. Not a single one. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, trying to decide if this was anger or just deep fatigue. Then one of my aunts stood up, glass in hand, and said, "We all know Odessa was strong-willed, but let's be honest. Selena was the one who stayed, the one who held her hand at the end. Some of us disappeared when she needed us most." I felt my stomach tighten. My cousin Jordan leaned in. "You were always the artistic one," he whispered. "But fragile, you know what I mean." I didn't reply. I just reached for my coat and stood up. No one stopped me. In the hallway, I took out my phone and opened the email again. My finger hovered over the bottom of the screen. That's when I noticed it. There was a scroll bar. A second page. I hadn't seen it before. "If they ever turn on you, don't fight them in the room. That's not where truth wins. It wins in stillness, in evidence. Go back to the source. You'll find everything you need where I left it. I made sure of it." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I stepped out into the evening air. The truth wasn't in that room, but I knew exactly where it was. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. My mother's words kept looping in my head, like a code I couldn't crack, a riddle that pulsed just beneath my skin. Go back to the source. It echoed in the silence of my apartment long after the city outside had gone to bed. At 7:12 the next morning, I stood outside a building I hadn't visited since my 20s. Brick facade, third-floor office, a small bronze plaque that read, "Franklin Givens, Estate Law." The doorman looked older. He recognized me. Barely. "Still look like Odessa," he said quietly, holding the door open. I nodded, but didn't reply. Inside, the elevator creaked the way it always had. I remembered being 12, sitting in that office beside my mother, swinging my legs while she signed something I wasn't allowed to understand. She had told me then, sometimes a signature says more than words. Franklin met me in the hallway. He hadn't aged much, still had the same houndstooth blazer, the same way of folding his hands like a funeral director preparing bad news. But when he saw me, he smiled. Not pity, not concern. Recognition. "Charmy," he said, extending a hand. "I was wondering how long it would take." "Is that so?" I asked, stepping into the office. He motioned for me to sit. There were no pleasantries. He walked over to the filing cabinet, pulled out a thick red folder, and placed it gently on the table between us. "Your mother asked me to wait," he said. "She made it clear this file was to be opened only if and when you came on your own. No one was to push you." He slid it forward. I opened it. Inside were pages, some typed, some handwritten. On top was a notarized document titled Durant Family Living Trust, Art and Property Addendum. My name was the only beneficiary listed under the Durant penthouse. Not Durant sisters, not equal heirs, just me. Selena knows nothing about this? I asked. Franklin shook his head. She assumes the condo was transferred into her name because of a draft she saw years ago. Your mother never finalized that one. She changed everything 6 months before she passed. I skimmed the paperwork. It wasn't just ownership, it was structure. A trust for public arts outreach. A clause that the property be protected, preserved, not gutted for resale or commercial use. She wanted it to become something lasting, Franklin said, not just valuable. I didn't realize I was gripping the folder until he laid a hand on it. There's more, he said. Something personal. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small USB drive. He plugged it into his laptop, angled the screen toward me, and hit play. The screen flickered. Then she appeared. My mother, Odessa Durant, seated in her reading chair, wrapped in a blanket I hadn't seen since her chemo days. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady, sharp. If you're watching this, Charmy, she began, then I didn't get to tell you in person, and that's my greatest regret. Not because I doubt what I've done, but because I know what Selena will make you feel. She paused, took a breath. I didn't choose you because you're the better daughter. I chose you because you never asked for anything, and that's how I knew you wouldn't waste what mattered. Her voice was even, controlled. You didn't inherit this place. You were entrusted with it. And if your sister tries to tear it apart, remind her this home was never built for applause. It was built for meaning. The screen went black. I said nothing. Franklin handed me a paper slip. A meeting confirmation with the property board, scheduled for the next morning. I didn't remember asking him to set it up, but maybe he knew me better than I thought. I assume you'll need to bring that notice with you too, he said, lifting another document. I took it. It was a violation report, filed against the Durant condo unit, unauthorized structural modifications, signed off by 1S Harlow. The kitchen demo, the wine cellar conversion, the removal of the archive walls, all listed. All on record. Selena hadn't just tried to rewrite the story, she'd left a paper trail while doing it. I stood up, gathered the file, the flash drive, and the notice. Franklin didn't walk me to the door. He didn't need to. As I stepped into the hallway, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Finally. Selena had buried the past in renovations, edits, silence. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. One signature at a time. The next morning came without fanfare. No glowing sunrise, no cinematic breeze through the window, just the ticking of my kitchen clock, too loud in the silence. I got dressed in dark navy slacks, a simple blouse, and a soft gray coat my mother once picked out for me. I didn't wear it often, but that morning I needed something of hers on me, even if it was just the lining brushing my wrists. I arrived 15 minutes early to the board meeting. The condo's private lounge had been converted into a temporary hearing room, sleek chairs, a long walnut table, water pitchers that no one touched. Outside the glass doors, I noticed 2 people with press badges hovering quietly in the hallway. One carried a small video camera. They weren't live, not yet, but they were waiting. Inside, 3 board members sat reviewing folders. Their expressions were practiced, neither friendly nor cold. They had the weary neutrality of people who'd seen too many neighbors sue over hallway paint colors. Then the door opened and Selena walked in. She wore ivory. Of course she did. A fitted dress, heels sharp enough to be weapons, and a gold pen clipped to a notepad that she probably wouldn't write in. She gave the room a warm smile, one of those expressions that suggested both innocence and inevitability. "Good morning," she said, settling into the chair at the far end of the table. "I'm happy to clarify any misunderstandings." Her attorney sat beside her. Young, expensive-looking, wearing a watch that cost more than the average car. He looked at me like I was about to waste his time. The board chair, a man named Wexler, cleared his throat. Let's begin. Ms. Durant, we've reviewed a formal complaint citing unauthorized modifications made to Unit 31A. Do you have documentation to support your claim? I reached into my bag and pulled out the file Franklin had prepared. I handed it to the assistant, who distributed copies. This is the certified trust agreement, I said calmly. Signed and notarized 6 months before my mother's passing. It names me as the sole trustee of the Durant family penthouse, including all contents and fixtures, with explicit conditions regarding structural integrity. Wexler flipped through the pages. His eyes paused on the signature page. Selina shifted, but said nothing. And, I added, I'd like to play a short recording, if you'll allow it. Wexler nodded. I pulled out a small speaker from my bag and placed it on the table. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. Soft, tired, steady. This home, and everything in it, was meant for Charmy. Not because she's the youngest, but because she's the only one who never tried to take it. For a moment, no one moved. Selina's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her. She didn't respond. Her hands were clenched under the table. I continued. There's also an updated valuation report. As of last quarter, the condo, along with the original art, the rare design pieces, and the remaining architectural manuscripts, is estimated at over $450 million. Wexler raised an eyebrow. Ms. Harlow, were you aware of this valuation? Selina exhaled slowly. I was under the impression the property had been restructured into a family asset. Your name doesn't appear on the trust, I said, looking directly at her. And the permit applications you submitted for structural changes? They violated the governing rules of the building and the trust, which brings us here. The board members exchanged quiet glances. Then Wexler looked up. Thank you. We'll deliberate now. We waited. 10 minutes, then 15. The silence stretched like glass, delicate but ready to break. When they returned, Wexler's voice was even. The board acknowledges the validity of the trust and has reviewed the violation notice. We vote unanimously to recognize Charmy Durant as the legal owner of Unit 31A. All renovation permits issued under Ms. Harlow are hereby revoked. Ms. Harlow will have 10 days to vacate the premises. No applause, no shock. Just paper being stacked neatly and a gavel that didn't exist tapping the edge of Wexler's folder. I stood slowly, adjusted my coat. This isn't a victory, I said, voice level. It's a restoration. As I turned to leave, Selina said nothing. Not at first, but just as I passed her chair, she looked up. Not with anger, but something colder. She always picked you, she said quietly, even when you were a ghost in this house. I didn't stop walking, but my hands tightened at my sides. Ghosts don't forget. They remember everything, especially what you tried to bury. By the time I got home from the board meeting, the press had already done the talking for me. I didn't need to say a word. The headline on one of the local news sites read, Architect's daughter restores legacy after bitter estate battle. It was clean, sanitized, but it made one thing clear. I was no longer invisible. Still, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the pause before another blow. 3 days later, just before midnight, I received a message from a firm I didn't recognize. A legal firm apparently retained on behalf of an anonymous party. They had submitted a complaint, formally accusing me of forging trust documentation. Attached to the message was a PDF, photos of a printed will. One page, my mother's signature, my own. A timestamp that placed my name on the document 3 days before Mom's recorded final signature. Fraud. That was the word they used. A word that felt too sharp and too false to land cleanly, but it cut just the same. An hour later, someone leaked it to social media. Not a news outlet, not even a blogger, just a faceless account with a caption that read, Trust fund baby caught faking her way into inheritance. It spread like dry grass catching flame. No context, no correction, just insinuation. I stared at the screen for a long while. And then I got up, walked to the file drawer I hadn't touched since the funeral, and pulled out the envelope Franklin had marked Private Handwritten Addendum. I remembered what he'd said the day I visited his office. Your mother wrote this with no intention of it being read by lawyers first. She wanted clarity, not litigation. I unfolded the first page. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, tight, deliberate, not like her usual messy post-it notes or scribbles on the margins of architectural sketches. If any part of this home is altered, structurally, legally, or reputationally, by anyone attempting to distort my wishes, their claim to it becomes null. This isn't punishment. This is protection. The truth is worth preserving, not debating. It was signed, dated, and attached to a scanned floor plan with highlighted notes. Her notes, about which walls could never be touched. Walls that Selena had torn down during her so-called modernization. I forwarded the entire file to Franklin, CC'd the estate lawyer, and added one line. Please notify the condo board. This is my formal response. No rage, no plea, just fact. I spent the next day in silence. No media interviews, no angry posts, no rebuttals. Instead, I went back to the condo, alone this time. I wanted to walk through it before it stopped being a battleground and became a home again. I unlocked the door, walked in. The space was empty. Selena hadn't been by since the meeting, but I could feel the tension lingering like smoke. I went to the archive room. It had been resealed after the board's vote. The keypad had been replaced, and I now had the code. I opened it. Inside, nothing had been restored. The plastered wall was still smooth where she'd covered up the built-in shelves. The carpet had been stripped. The ceiling lights were harsh and clinical. But in the far left corner, a single cabinet remained. One she hadn't managed to gut. It was locked, of course, but the key had been sitting in my mother's old sewing kit, in a drawer no one else had touched. I opened the cabinet. Inside was a sketch pad. Old, water-stained at the edges. The kind my mother had always used for her personal designs, never for clients. On the first page, a pencil drawing of the condo, floor plan, handwritten notes, and then a phrase scrawled across the margin, as if she'd written it quickly, without stopping to think, this is hers. Let her prove it the right way. Not let her fight for it. Let her prove it. That night, just after 2 a.m., I heard the front door buzz. I checked the camera. It was her. Selena. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She stood there with her phone in one hand and a box in the other, probably here to retrieve the last of her belongings. I buzzed the door. She stepped in, walked through the lobby with a calm that felt practiced. I met her at the entryway. We didn't say hello. She glanced around. So this is it now, she muttered. I nodded. You came for the box? She handed it to me without a word, then added, You think this makes you better? I looked at her. Not through her. Not around her. At her. No, I think it makes me right. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, quiet for a beat, then said, She always saw you as the safe one, the backup plan, the one who wouldn't get in the way. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the desk, picked up the legal notice the building had delivered earlier that day, handed it to her. Effective immediately, I said. You're barred from the unit until further legal review. That includes the common areas. Her hand shook as she took it, just slightly. You really think this makes you better than me? I didn't answer her, because for the first time, I realized this was never about being better. It was about being right. 3 days after I handed Selena the legal notice, I stood barefoot in the center of the penthouse, watching light filter through the tall windows as a quiet hum of voices echoed down the hallway. The board had arranged for a press walkthrough to mark the condo's new designation as a historical property, an effort to honor my mother's contributions, not just to architecture, but to the cultural landscape of the city. It wasn't my idea, but I didn't oppose it. Not anymore. I wasn't protecting a structure. I was protecting what it stood for. I wore black slacks, a simple cream blouse, no makeup except a thin stroke of eyeliner. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to be present. The walls had been left mostly bare, at my request. I didn't want this to look like a gallery. I wanted space to breathe, to remember, to begin again. Except for one piece. In the heart of the living room, mounted under soft lighting, was a mixed media canvas my mother had started in her final months. I'd found it in the sealed cabinet tucked behind the plaster wall, one of the few things Selena hadn't reached. It showed two female figures. One was fully painted, in rich oils, colors bold and certain. The other was a sketch, faint, almost translucent, her features unfinished. My mother had titled it Balance. The press arrived in small waves, a journalist from an architecture magazine, a photographer from a city newspaper, one young videographer who set up a single camera and asked if I wanted to be recorded. I declined. "I'll say a few words," I told them. "No script, just something simple." When everyone had settled, I stood before the painting. "This isn't a museum," I said. "It's a memory, one we don't all agree on, but one I will protect." No one clapped. No one needed to. As I turned to walk them toward the guest rooms, I caught movement near the entry. A familiar silhouette. Selena. She stepped in quietly, hair pulled back, face bare. She wore a loose sweater and slacks. No jewelry, no entourage, just her. A board member approached her immediately, offering a copy of the legal order. "I'm only here to see the art," she said, lifting her hand slightly. "I won't touch anything." The journalist glanced at me, unsure. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The board rep nodded once and firmly stated, "You'll need to step back into the hallway, Ms. Harlow. This is a restricted tour." Selena didn't protest. She just stood there, staring past me at the painting. Her eyes stayed fixed on the unfinished figure. "This house was always ours," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. Just because she had the key doesn't mean she owned the story. The air grew tight. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked toward the painting, slowly, deliberately, and stood in front of it, not blocking it, not claiming it, just facing it. Selena turned and walked out, her steps heavy, uneven. No one followed her. The rest of the tour passed quickly. Polite questions, light nods, murmurs about legacy and design, and how personal history can live inside walls. By early evening, the press had gone. I turned off the main lights, closed the curtains, lit a single candle. Then I stood before the painting again. I stared at the second figure, the one in charcoal, the one she never finished. Was that me? Or was it Selena? Or maybe it wasn't either of us. Maybe it was both. Maybe she didn't finish it on purpose. Because some stories weren't meant to be completed. They were meant to linger. I didn't erase it. I didn't fill it in. I left it exactly as it was. Before going to bed, I placed a small brass plate beneath the frame. I engraved it that night. No date, no artist bio, just one sentence. What's left unfinished sometimes says the most. Some stories aren't meant to be finished, just remembered, with care. That morning began with the smell of freshly cut lavender. Not from any expensive candle or curated arrangement, just a single bundle, tied with twine, left at the foot of the front door. No note, no signature, just placed there with intention. I stood for a moment, barefoot on the cold tile. The soft hum of morning traffic, a distant echo through the windows. I picked it up, pressed it to my nose. It smelled like her. Like Mom's kitchen on Sundays, when she'd tuck sprigs into a jar of warm honey and call it cheap therapy. 1 month had passed since the board vote. The penthouse had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. What was once sterile had been rehumanized, not through luxury, but by memory. I walked the halls slowly that morning, each step deliberate. There was no rush. Today wasn't about me. It wasn't about Selena either. It wasn't even about our mother. Today was for those who had never met her. We were hosting the first open morning of the Odessa Durant Reflection Room. Not a gallery, not a museum. A space for pause, for silence, for stories not yet told. The apartment had been gently rearranged into a series of quiet moments. In one corner, there was a sketch station with free paper, pencils, and a sign that simply read, "What do you wish your mother had told you?" Across from that, we'd set up a tea table, the same rickety one she used in her classroom when she volunteered at the Public Arts Center. Teresa Albano, our old housekeeper, had insisted we serve black tea in mismatched mugs. "That's how she always did it," Teresa said, placing the chipped porcelain with care. Next to the hallway leading to the bedrooms, there was a wall lined with envelopes, each one containing a letter written by a young artist, addressed to a woman I wish I'd known. We didn't vet the content. That wasn't the point. They were sealed and taped gently, like offerings. A living archive of imagined connection. By 8:30, Ria Menken had arrived with a folded blanket and a bouquet of tulips. She said little, just hugged me once, then wandered off toward the sketch station. 10 minutes later, I saw it. A plain envelope slipped through the mail slot. No stamp, no handwriting on the front. Just there, waiting. I opened it quietly, away from the others. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, high quality, familiar. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. "You were right. She did choose, and I see now why." That was all it said. No apology, no blame. Just acceptance. I folded it, walked to the library shelf, and tucked it into the spine of The Ethics of Space, a book my mother had kept at her bedside for decades. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't feel triumphant. Closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it looks like quiet honesty. By 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. Our first guests. I opened the door and found a young girl, maybe 15, with her grandmother. The girl wore a faded backpack. Her hair was tied up with a pen stuck through the knot like a makeshift bun. I smiled. "Welcome," I said. The grandmother's voice was quiet. She wanted to see the room, her mother. She was too tired to come. The girl added, "She never really had time for her art, so I figured I'd come for both of us." I stepped aside and motioned them in. "Then you already understand everything this place was built for." They walked slowly, the girl trailing her fingers along the wall as they passed. Outside, etched into the glass panel beside the entrance, was the only quote I had allowed on display. "Legacy is not what you keep, it's what you leave open." The morning continued gently. No press, no speeches, just people, some crying, some laughing, most just sitting quietly, watching, remembering, dreaming. I walked to the west window, the one Mom always claimed had the only decent light in this whole city. The chair she used to read in had been restored. The cushion was new, but the frame was the same. I sat. The painting still hung in the main room. Balance. Still unfinished. Still perfect. I heard the door open again, but didn't turn. If it was someone meant to be here, they'd find their way in. And if not, the door would stay open anyway. I never locked that door. I only made sure it opened for the right ones,